Okay, so hello, welcome again from my side to this lovely place and to this Hot Topics conference here. We are happy to support Kamailio in this context, and I hope you will enjoy Berlin. We didn't do that good with the weather in this part of the year, but anyhow, I think you will have a good experience of Berlin. I'm a little bit pressured by time because I have to leave strict at 12 o'clock, so probably I will not manage to get through all of those slides, but I want to give you a little bit of outlook where the world is heading and where to bring in the, let's call it M2M, the voice over IP or human-to-human communications, which is still important, of course. Humans want to get in touch with each other. But these days, I guess operators, vendors, and also funding groups are looking for other buzzwords. And these buzzwords these days are particularly in the communications world are related to 5G. And so I want to shed a little bit of light into my view and also some others' view on what 5G is. Nevertheless, I want to tell you also that there is a roadmap from what we have done and what you are doing here in the multimedia space. And it's about this facilitation of what I call crazy researchers or startups or even big vendors who are talking to us, and we want to help them in this context. So I'm just using the slides a little bit for orientation, but the main message is there is some gap in between a commercial solution and the first ideas. And of course, you are starting to prototype things, and then you want to see how these things can work. This relates to new protocols, as we have just seen here, new architectures. And you, in some extent, want to see how does it work with potentially real users. And exactly this is where we are starting. We are starting in providing an infrastructure or toolkits which facilitate different players of the ecosystem to see how things are working, where things have to be optimized in order to come to a real product. And this is what we have done in the past by what we call playgrounds. Playgrounds for engineers. Typically, the word you hear in the general world is test facilities, experimental facilities. We try to give it a different brand, and I think it's very well accepted by this industry these days. So the main lesson learned, and you know that FOKUS was the starting point for the SIP Express router, and it was basically Henning Schulzrinne who, as a visiting scientist, started to do the work on this SIP Express router. And by the way, last week I met him in New York City, and he is these days also looking at very similar areas I'm going to talk about. Nevertheless, the SIP Express router was a great facilitation instrument for the industry and also for the researchers to see how things can go on. And we continued this journey at FOKUS with the more carrier view of it, and this was the IMS system and the open source IMS. We continued this journey by understanding that IMS is a complex animal and it takes a long time to hit the market. Well, we are finally here and see IMS being deployed. But nevertheless, we also understood that in communications, connectivity matters. And this was the time when the Open EPC was developed by our team. And we wanted particularly to enable also internet applications with quality of service on top of a very converging network. Converging network here in the sense it's not only the 3G, 4G networks, but Wi-Fi and other network types coming into the game. And particularly in this context, we have continued our journey in moving into the SDN area, software-defined networks, and I guess all of you are aware of OpenFlow and other initiatives in this context, the separation of the control and the user paths, and particularly inspired by cloud-based infrastructures coming up and the data centers being deployed. And in this context, we developed some new functionality, which these days is quite high demanded, and this is the OpenSDNCore. So this is an infrastructure which particularly supports ongoing standards in the field of network function virtualization. So basically to bring an IMS system, to bring an EPC, or even to bring an M2M platform into a data-centric architecture. And exactly this toolkit facilitates this kind of service provisioning or network component provisioning in a cloud-based environment. We have been engaged in many projects related to IMS, and 5 years ago, particularly network operators like Vodafone started to think about to use this technology for machine-to-machine communications. Quite strange, particularly when considering the scalability issues. Nevertheless, we did it also with a trial in Düsseldorf, but nevertheless, the major finding and also what we expected upfront is we need a dedicated new platform for this new kind of communication. And this brought us at FOKUS to the development of the OpenMTC, Machine Type Communications Platform, which particularly is based on the ETSI and WAN M2M standards. Finally, last but not least, and you know that we have created a very shiny spin-off company, Core Network Dynamics, which is really focusing on the commercialization of the Open EPC. Nevertheless, there's a lot of research in the evolution of core network infrastructures. And this is particularly also based on this, let's say, flexibility, where to place the control, how to optimize the traffic. This is what we call the 5G core. And this is basically an infrastructure which allows you today to have a very flexible core network architecture, which particularly supports things like Cisco calls it fog computing, we call it mobile edge computing. So this, in a nutshell, is the evolution of things we have done, toolkits which are utilized to develop test beds in our premises. So again, there's a slide which somehow shows this a little bit more nicely, how this evolution is. I don't go into the details, but to give you a feeling, we are utilizing these toolkits like a Lego brick system. And depending on project needs, customer needs, we can group those together, can mix them with ongoing products from the partners, from the vendors, in order to create a setting which allows to prototype and do the proof of concept and pilot realizations. So this means we have gone from this IPTEL-org kind of infrastructure to the IMS playground, which then was handed over into the FOKUS playground. We started, or basically we stopped to use technology names for our playgrounds, because technologies change, and FOKUS, somehow an artificial name, Future Seamless Communications, is the basic idea behind it, can accommodate any type of network, any type of control infrastructure. We also started initiatives in what is called Smart Communications Playground, so particularly to facilitate applications which are in the field of what today is called smart cities, so e-health, automotive, smart energy, which all need some kind of connectivity, and particularly in this, let's call it buzzword of smart cities, where big cities are trying to compete against each other to have the most advanced infrastructures to support the industry, but also the citizens. So this was addressed by the Smart Communications Playground. Basically, again, utilizing the toolkits. And we call this these days, because these infrastructures are cloud-based, testbed as a service, but we also recognize that customers want to have their own testbeds in their own premises. And this basically can be achieved by shipping our toolkits to those places. And we are doing this all around the world. So our toolkits, as you probably know, are utilized in Japan, in South Africa, in Asia, in the US to do prototyping. So I don't go into the details of this old stuff, but what is currently the snapshot is that we have this FOKUS playground in the FOKUS premises. And you see here illustrated that it is basically constituting a lot of those toolkits which can be brought together in order to support specific project needs. We are highly engaged in these European research and experimentation projects. This is the academic leg from my group, but we are in most of the cases, as we are with Fraunhofer, have to work with the industry, and this means we are working with the industry utilizing this kind of infrastructure. So a specific subset of this, which now deserves a little bit more attention because everyone is crazy in Europe and around the world about 5G coming up, is the 5G playground. So the 5G playground is now a quite unique infrastructure which utilizes some of the toolkits I've mentioned before, particularly the Open5G Core, the OpenSDN Core, and what we call 5G MTC, so it's a cut-down version, a highly optimized version to support machine-to-machine communications in the industrial environment with low latency and high throughput and massive devices being connected to the network infrastructure. So this is something what we are currently offering, and I think this is a quite unique offer in the world. We see other activities. For instance, in the UK, you have also a 5G infrastructure in Surrey, which moves a lot of money, but there's currently not anything you can utilize to prototype your crazy ideas. And this 5G playground is enhanced by activities which are undertaken by Heinrich Hertz Institute. Heinrich Hertz Institute is another research institution here in Berlin, also a Fraunhofer institute, which is very advanced in the wireless part and in the radio aspects. And so here, this is what we bring together under the buzzword of 5G Berlin. And you have probably seen some press releases that we are working also together with Deutsche Telekom in the 5G house, which makes use of this infrastructure for prototyping. So what is this 5G? And I want to raise your awareness because voice, as I said, is important. There are solutions. We can do it better to support the multimedia communications. But nowadays, everyone gets crazy about the Internet of Things. And you know, these are the stupid iWatches or whatever you want to call them, which are connected to provide a communications environment of the humans. But to a large extent, it is much more than just IoT and the Internet of Things. So we talk now about a network infrastructure which should be much more efficient, low cost, multi-access network support. It should be, as you see here, I've taken some of these marketing slides from 5G PPP, which is the big European initiative to try to bring Europe into the leading position in 5G technologies. And on the other hand, I have here some slide taken from the NGMN Alliance, which is also currently in the white paper describing what 5G is. And in this regard, you see that the number of terminals to be supported, the kind of mobility which should be supported, the kind of location which should be optimized, the throughput which is expected, and nevertheless, also what is not, I think, illustrated here on this slide, low latency. So coming from 50 milliseconds down to 1 to 2 milliseconds. This is one of the key targets in order to control robots or to do things like autonomous driving, where cars have to communicate with each other in the infrastructure, and fast response times are needed to do this. So these are some of the design aspects for this new architecture. And obviously, you can see this is driven by the support or the need to support device-to-device communication, where, of course, voice over IP or multimedia communication of humans is something which can be very easily on top of this be supported. I skipped this slide, and I just want to give you a short outlook. What is the current architectural thinking of a 5G network infrastructure? And you probably are listening to discussions about this new radio interface coming up, where people are now talking about the 60 gigahertz spectrum in order to support, which is free, which could be utilized for this kind of communication. But it's a long way to get this high-performant radio interface in place. So people talk about 2020 to get this done in form of products. But nevertheless, what is very important when you read the white papers around 5G, it is a network which is based on heterogeneous network technologies. So also Wi-Fi, LTE, fixed networks, satellites should be integrated as far as they are available. So we talk really about a very converged network infrastructure. Even parts of the network infrastructure in the radio part, the E-node Bs or the access nodes, whatever you want to call it, will be moved into a cloud-based infrastructure. So this is why typically people these days talk about cloud-run architectures in order to have a much more efficient support of the radio interface and allowing much more antenna systems to be deployed in an efficient way. So this is what the left-hand side of this view graph here should illustrate. And you see not necessarily humans and smartphones here. You see lots of devices which are basically considered as the drivers of this architecture. What is more important for us is the other side, the right-hand side of this slide. And this is that we have, in the end, a network infrastructure which is highly flexible, typically a data center-driven infrastructure which is connected by fiber optics to a large extent, providing the core infrastructure. To place network functionality on top of this. And this is basically the second layer which is illustrated here. So the idea is that in the future, this core network infrastructure is shared, sliced to be utilized by different network operators who can define their own network architecture on top of this. And this could be an EPC as we know it. It could be a 5G core control architecture as it is currently under definition, or it can be anything you can imagine. So this is quite important to understand. And it is important to look at the right-hand side of this because all this is software-driven. So the network becomes software, and the funny part or the nice part of it is that you can deploy control and communication elements in this architecture as it is needed in a highly dynamic way, of course exploiting cloud technologies for scalability, for energy efficiency, and also to, for instance, bring control to places where it is needed in a very dynamic way. Mobile edge cloud computing is the buzzword for this. We called it 15 years ago mobile agent technology, but now the technology, cloud technology, is at hand and makes things much easier. And then, of course, on the most northern part, we see very special instantiations, let's call it virtual network operators. And I think this is very important to take home, that the 5G infrastructure will probably enable a mushrooming of virtual network operators. And those virtual network operators are not the classical ones we know today, but those are the car manufacturers, those are the guys who are providing any type of goods which have their own control infrastructure now in place. They can bring it in place. Standards will probably play only a minor role in the future because this is a software deployment and management game which will happen in the future. So just to understand, 5G is not just a radio interface, but is a software-based infrastructure. And when you take a look at the driving applications from which the design requirements are pulled from, are IoT, machine-to-machine communications in this context. So this means that in the end, you can have many of those overlays running in parallel on top of this common shared infrastructure operated by some operators or someone else, as you can play in your mind what might be possible. Yeah? So this is what is coming up. And in fact, when we take a look at the network architecture, which in the end could be a combination of the underlying network infrastructure and any one of those overlays, we talk about a distributed data center architecture which is able to host dynamically control logic which performs specific functionalities like connectivity or, let's say, the transport of data, voice, video, content, whatever is needed here, or just the machine-to-machine communications. And this is what we currently have in our infrastructure at FOKUS. So this is a high-level view of the 5G playground. And this is enabled by the aforementioned toolkits, the 5G, the Open5G Core, the Open5G MTC infrastructure for machine-to-machine communications, and the OpenSDN Core, which allows the dynamic placement of control entities in a data center infrastructure. So I don't have the time here to go into the details of these different platforms, so you will find a few slides on each of this platform, but you can say the Open5G Core is to some extent an evolution of the OpenEPC, where we particularly have thrown away all the legacy support and started with an EPC version, and from here particularly enforced the separation of control and data and have much more flexibility in placing the components. Yeah? So the lessons learned from OpenEPC are taken here as a starting point. There is no standard for a 5G core at this point in time. This is going to be developed, but we have a toolkit which allows to instantiate different scenarios which probably came up in the course of standardization. And this is also why we work with key vendors in this domain on early prototypes. So most of the R&D centers of those vendors are currently talking to us or already have bought a 5G core license to play around. I don't want to go too much on this, but very important is also an announcement for another conference you might be very interested, and particularly related to this conference, we will show a lot of demos of our laboratories and the toolkits, is particularly this kind of blueprint where you can see that we really can dynamically place the control of, let's say, managing a network, managing the connectivity, managing mobility, so we can place this in a high dynamic way. And of course, we can put it at the edge of the network. And this is what is then called mobile edge cloud computing, which these days is considered a key enabling technology for machine-to-machine and industrial applications. So this is the target. The OpenSDN Core, just briefly, is an environment which allows to provision virtual or virtualized network functions. So we had good experience made in a big European project, particularly with the OpenIMS core and bringing this into a distributed data center infrastructure. We moved the EPC as well into this context, and we are deploying machine-to-machine components. Based on this experience, utilizing an OpenStack infrastructure, a lot of additional components have been developed in line with the emerging ATSI NFV standards. And so those of you who are interested, what is currently the view of the industry, ATSI NFV is probably the best target to go. So no time to go into the details of this slide. Just keep in mind that this virtual network functions could be some voice over IP, IMS, M2M, but also core network control functions which can be dynamically deployed in a distributed data center infrastructure. So, and exactly this is what you can see already in our labs if you would visit us at Fraunhofer FOKUS these days. I don't go into the details of the 5G MTC platform. Maybe one important aspect here is the dynamic deployment and provisioning of devices. And I think this is what the network architecture of the future brings with it. The high number of end systems which have to be instantly, let's say, configured, deployed in the network infrastructure, associated to some controlling server, which either aggregates the data or particularly controls those devices because it is some kind of application for device management or, let's say, control of the environment. So, to sum up, we are currently moving very, very strongly into this area of 5G, which is a software-driven infrastructure, particularly allowing the integration of any type of access network as long as it is IP. So the buzzword you very often hear nowadays is heterogeneous networks being controlled by a software-driven architecture. And we know that, of course, in this context, human-to-human communication is very important. And this is why I'm here and also want to tell you that we are, of course, not only focusing on the machine-to-machine and Internet of Things, we also have an open eye on what is going on in this more disruptive human-to-human communication space, being it a cut-down VoLTE server provided in a cloud-based infrastructure, or being it even crazy new protocols as we have heard it before. We provide an infrastructure which enables you to prototype this, and that there are means in place to make use of the FOKUS Playground or the 5G Playground in your kind of, let's say, business explorations. So if you're interested in this, don't hesitate to contact me or Dragos or anyone here from the Core Network Dynamics team. And the last word I want to spend is, we used to have the FOKUS forum also here in this forum, but as you also can see it these days, it is limited in space, and you cannot party all the night because of the other guests here. Therefore, we do this kind of event at Fraunhofer FOKUS, close to our labs. So beginning of November, we are opening again the doors for the FOKUS forum, which was used to be called the IMS forum. So this is now the 11th edition of it, and it's very strongly focusing on the things I've told you, and you can see all what I told you live there in our labs, and I would be happy to see some of you again in Berlin, beginning of November. That's it from my side. There is not too much time left, maybe one question. Everything else I would pass to Dragos, who should be in the back of the room. He can probably tell you exactly more about this if needed.
Yeah, Dragos has also a presentation to stress it a bit more on the technical side later. I take this question because as we spoke about security these days, and I know everyone is concerned, as you describe a lot about machine-to-machine communication, how you see the impact of security, and even just a few weeks ago it was that issue with some famous car manufacturer in Germany. Would FOKUS put a high priority and on this kind of security and privacy? I'm saying also because, you know, we are here in Germany, where it's maybe one of the top countries concerned about this kind of topic.
Very tricky, let's say, good question, first of all. And of course, I have to say, yes, we are looking at this, but this is probably in the beginning not our highest target. FOKUS is customer-driven. Customer-driven here means what are the key questions of our customers. Partially, security is also one thing, but for most of the customers, first they want to understand, how does it work? Is it performant? And I have to say here, we have a very dedicated Fraunhofer Institute SIT, which is particularly looking for security. So in this regard, we will work together with those security experts in this field as well. But you can be sure that when we are currently having bigger projects for developing a control infrastructure for factories, that security is an important topic, which will be addressed.
Sorry for abusing having the microphone first. I don't know if other questions are here. Again, Dragos and actually the team at Core Network Dynamics and some other people from FOKUS are outside. They have this very nice looking, or at least impressive equipment, mobile LTE equipment. So don't forget to go there and see a live demo of what they did. And actually, as you could notice with FOKUS, their playground gets more and more mature, and then you have options to go in some commercials, and we have Core Network Dynamics around for that, you know, getting it working and ensuring you get a proper quality of service and support for those things that started at FOKUS. So FOKUS doesn't really stop there, or at least the people inside it. You can find afterwards that it happened with SIP Express router, IP.org. Now look for Core Network Dynamics. They are the guys doing the cool stuff these days, ready for you out there.
In fact, the main idea is really that there's a strong cooperation with Core Network Dynamics, obviously, but we as Fraunhofer have to be also independent. So we are also working with other manufacturers and startups and so on. And of course, from what I told you, there's a high potential to see probably in the next 2 years, 1 or 2 additional startups coming out of this. Okay, I have to leave. Sorry for this. So if you are interested, you have the contact details on the slides, which you get. And again, Dragos & Co. is here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.